Welcome, my fellow Americans, to Two Guys on Politics. I'm Bill Lipinski, and the top man in politics, as far as I'm concerned, is my co host, Ray Hanania.
And I like to think I'm that Dodgers batter, Otani. Okay, I'm getting up there to that man has to be the best baseball player in America, right?
He probably is, yes.
I don't. Are you a big baseball fan, Bill?
Oh, yes, I'm a very big baseball fan. Absolutely.
And what did you think of the World Series? The Dodgers kind of, there was a moment when listen, when I was young, you hear the Dodgers and the Yankees, you're thinking, wow, what a powerful game. And
Absolutely.
so that brought back those memories for me watching this World Series. But the Yankees just didn't do that well.
No, they did not do that well at all. The Dodgers have an unbelievable team.
Oh
Of
my
course,
gosh, yeah.
they've paid for it also. They have by far the highest payroll in all of baseball. And I don't see how anyone's going to really compete with them unless they make mistakes. I mean, the Yankees yesterday, though, threw that game away. They were up 5-0.
Yeah, yeah,
They made two errors, physical errors, in one mental error, which
yeah.
led to 5 runs being scored by the Dodgers.
And this is a preface. I'm Ray Hanania, also Two Guys on Politics. And it's October 31st, Halloween 2024, season 3, episode 34. And Bill and I, maybe we'll talk a little baseball because it was a great series to watch, although unfortunately it was kind of one sided. But we're going to be talking about the tenor and the name calling that seems to be dominating the presidential election more than the issues, right, Bill? It's just
Absolutely
horrible.
no question about it. I'm not sure. Are there any issues in this campaign? It seems like it's really just personal
Oh,
attacks.
yeah, it's only how to spell those personal attacks. How the name calling, how do you spell those and how do you reference them in a news story? But, each side is throwing mud at the other side as if they're good and the mud they throw isn't really mud. They're just muddying each other up. My head hurts from all the. I turn off the TV. I switch channels. I don't want to watch anything that has to do with the campaigns at all because it's so horrible. Now, this all wasn't always the way it was it, Bill? There was a
Certainly,
time when we actually talked about they may not. They're rivals, just like the Dodgers and the New York Yankees were rivals, but they didn't. Degrade degrade each other the way our candidates are today. What was it like in the past?
we can go back to the 1960 election between John Fitzgerald Kennedy and Richard Milhouse Nixon. That was the closest election in our history. It was decided by 1% nationwide. All right. John Fitzgerald Kennedy said in April 28, 1961, there were 5,500 people at a fundraiser for him in Chicago. And he said if those 5,500 people had changed their mind and voted for Nixon and not for him, Nixon would be the president of the United States. That's how close it was. Just absolutely incredible. But that election was, fought out hard by two mature, experienced political people who had both served in World War II under fire.
Right.
They they knew what war meant, and they wanted no more of it. But I want to read to you, Ray. I've done some research. None of these words ever appeared in the 1960 campaign, but in the 2024 campaign, you can hear them each and
They're,
every day,
they're
sometimes
like headlines.
3, 4 times a day.
Yep.
Uh, no candidate in 1960 ever called his opponent a dictator using the military to subject and control the citizens of America. No candidate ever contended his opponent was a communist or a fascist. Words like Marxist, socialist, Nazis, they were never heard. No candidate called his opponent unstable, crazy, unhinged. Let me turn the page. And increasingly deranged, despicable, reprehensible, well, never used, deprived, depraved, corrupt, evil, never passed the lips of a 1960 presidential candidate. A part of our republic was never called garbage, or a candidate's supporters were never called garbage or deplorables. But you can hear those words every single day in the present presidential campaign. To me, it is an absolute disgrace to this country, and it makes us look terrible in the eyes of the world as far as I am concerned. And I say a plague on the house of both of these candidates for doing this to our country and not giving the American people a real opportunity to hear where they stand on the issues. One is nothing but condemn people, attack people. The other one is, I have a magnificent smile and I love to laugh. That's been the campaigns, as far as I'm concerned, of these two parties and these two candidates.
But both sides have been calling each other names, and you know, I always thought it started with Hillary Clinton when she called all of Trump's supporters the deplorables, and I thought, what a terrible way to address Americans, even if you didn't agree with them. And I think that's what hurt her. But it really wasn't her that started this name calling. I think it goes back to someone we both knew, Newt Gingrich, right? And what was it, 95 and 99 when he was the Speaker of the House?
Well, it started really with him and a guy by the name of Bob Walker from Pennsylvania doing special orders after Congress shut down for the day. It was about 1994. So the Newt is the man who started it. A man who, off the floor of the House, was one of the nicest guys you would ever meet, kind, outgoing, friendly. Once he was on the floor of the House, he was an absolute volcano in the things that he said about the Democrats. Yep, it started with Newt.
Yeah, and then, you know, there's always, you know, in covering politics for as long as I have and being involved in some media and consulting and stuff, there seems to be this belief, more so today than in the past, that negative can help you. That if you make someone look bad enough, you look better. So you get people that, instead of looking at me, my faults, and what I lack, you know, in leadership, I'm just going to call that person so many names that people are going to be saying, oh yeah, that person's bad. It's like today we vote against people, whereas before with Kennedy and Nixon, I think we both voted for people. But today we vote against them, don't we?
You're absolutely correct. We vote against them. Excuse me. Is there anybody that you covered on the local level that reminds you of name calling like we have on the presidential level? Is there anybody?
I'm going to say that when I covered City Hall, Jane Byrne called me a lot of names and a lot of people a lot of names. You know, Mike Bolandic was the nicest mayor ever.
Absolutely.
Maybe too nice. He was just a nice guy. And I'm not trying to be mean to Jane Byrne. She was tough. But her first press conference was to say that Bolandic was being controlled by a cabal of evil men. That was the first, you know, label that she threw on him. And then anybody that was perceived as not supporting her, she called me scum at a press conference for writing something about her cutting funding to a children's school that was in the 18th ward. I'm trying to think of the alderman of it at the time.
Well, that was
really, real nice guy.
Very, very Kellum,
Bob Kellum. Bob Kellum, yeah, Bob Kellum. So the nicest guy ever.
Oh, absolutely.
Never said a bad word about anybody, and she just got so upset that she called me scum at a press conference. I'm going, oh my gosh. And yeah, but and I'm not blaming Jane Byrne for this, trend, but there is a growing trend where negativism becomes the story rather than the issues, right? We're not talking about issues right now. We're talking
Absolutely
about
not.
people calling each other names.
It is embarrassing as far as I am concerned. I voted yesterday, and as I've told people, and I've said on this program, I couldn't bring myself to vote for either.
Yeah.
I didn't feel like they would represent America well. I didn't think that they would do a great deal of good for the American people. I still don't know what the vice president, frankly, stands for.
Right.
And Trump, you and I agree, many people agree, he has a lot of good programs. He did a lot of good things. But he is such a degenerate individual that I just can't. Now, a lot of people get past, they vote for him.
Right.
More
I mean,
power.
well, they because they're into the anger. You know, when you give the public anger, that's the one thing they can get into. It's easier for them to understand hating somebody than it is to understand the complexities of a TIF district or how property taxes are raised or how much money it costs to hire police to fight crime or how many more teachers we got to hire to make the schools better. You know, it's harder to understand that stuff, but it's easy when you say that somebody's deplorable, or it's easy to say that somebody is garbage. You know, I mean, just this latest thing, right? Trump is at a rally, and there's a comedian. In fairness, before Trump got there was a comedian that was doing jokes, and he made a joke about what's that big island of garbage in the ocean? Oh, that's Puerto Rico. And I'm going, wow, that's not. If there was something about Puerto Rico in the news, you might be able to make a joke about it. But just out of the blue, he just singled out Puerto Rico and insulted them to the cheers of the audience. And then a lot of people got upset by that.
A
And
lot.
then Joe,
Go ahead.
and then you saw President Biden hold basically make a statement from the White House saying that Donald Trump is garbage. And then, in fairness, I give Trump a little credit for this. He put on a hard hat and he got in a garbage truck and he started driving around one of those states where he's campaigning. He made light of it, which I think was a smart thing to do. I had expected him just to call Biden another name, and he's called Biden many terrible names, over the 8 years.
Uh, I I couldn't believe it. I was fairly certain that Trump was going to win this election. And then when this garbage bit came up, I
Yeah,
thought, no, looks to me like she might have a shot after all. But then Biden comes right out and blows the whole thing up. I mean,
right.
thank God he didn't run for reelection because
Yeah,
Trump would have won in an absolute total landslide. Because, I mean, he just pulled the rug out from underneath his vice president's feet with the statement about Trump supporters being garbage.
yeah. I always thought that, I mean, of course, like we both agree, the trend in politics has gone into the gutter. At more and more so than it used to be before. They're not talking about issues. It's kind of probably too late now, but a couple weeks ago, I think Harris could have saved herself by just ignoring Trump and talking about, and not even talking about the hot button issues like abortion or gun control, but talking about the stuff that really matters to people like crime and, the economy and the price of eggs and milk at the grocery store and how insurance costs are twice what they were, for a car. It's just almost impossible. All the money that we thought we were making is just evaporating in this terrible inflation that they keep saying isn't happening. But all she had to do was talk about something significant. And I bet a lot of people would have, said, wow, that's smart. But
Yeah,
neither candidate is doing that.
why didn't she do that? I don't understand it.
Well, she has the Clintons and the Obamas who
Oh,
rose up in politics by negative attack ads and name calling, maybe sophisticated name calling, not like now where it's just unbridled, whatever. But Obama and Clinton, and even Bush, they ran negative campaigns, negative ads, but they were a little sophisticated. They weren't just, name calling. But I think that they're kind of directing her. Trump is an easy guy to pick on to call names.
No question about it.
And the more you call him names, he gets petty, right? And he calls you names.
Absolutely. Look at how I managed to put up with you on this program, even though you're unhinged.
I'm unhinged. Jane Byrne, I'm proud. She called me scum. I thought, wow, I don't think any mayor has ever called anybody scum before.
What you should
But
have.
listen, I want to go back to that. Let's go back to that Kennedy Nixon race just for a minute. It was the closest race in the world for the United States back then, correct? It was, and it decided by a handful of stolen votes by the mob here in Chicago. Let's be honest. The mob stole that election, and they didn't have to win a lot of votes or steal a lot of votes. They stole just enough in that close election, to help Kennedy win.
You know what the percentages were in Illinois in that election? John Fitzgerald Kennedy got 50.1%.
Wow.
Hugh Nixon got 49.9%.
Wow. That's amazing.
The amazing thing to me is that in Texas, it was about the same. There are something like 10 states that were decided by less than 1 percentage point. A lot of people wanted Nixon to challenge in the courts and to say that it was stolen, because you referenced Illinois, and other people have talked about Texas, and people have talked about Pennsylvania and New Jersey. But Nixon refused to do so because he said it would look bad for America if he were to say the election was stolen from him, and that, there was a lot of skullduggery going on. That's how he felt in 1960. And most people do not think very highly of Richard Nixon because, frankly, he was paranoid. I think he was an excellent president. He had one problem. He was paranoid, and that, caused his downfall. But in 1960, when he would have been perfectly justified in going to court on many of these, he refused to do so.
Wow. And that took professionalism.
Absolutely.
You could have jumped into that gutter. Nixon could have jumped into the gutter. Now, a lot of people slam Nixon today because of Watergate. But at the time, during the debate and race with Kennedy, Nixon was one of the smartest people in the country.
No question.
The guy was brilliant. Even the first part of his term of presidency, he did some great things. And it was really a lot of his aides that really kind of pushed him into a corner, and he didn't stop himself, from digging himself into a grave when they brought that information about breaking into the Watergate and the Democratic Party headquarters there. But outside of that, he did some great things, so it was a different kind of negativeness, right, back then?
And when the break-in occurred in every poll in the country, he was up 15%. Why on earth would they have to break in to get some information about the Democratic candidate when the Democratic candidate was losing by 15%? Just that whole thing never made sense to me.
Yeah, and I think it was some of his aides that just maybe arrogance. I'm not sure what it is, but I think that's a big problem with politics today. The consultants run the elections. It's no longer the candidate that gets up there and says, "Hey, guys, knock it off. I want to get up there and talk about property taxes. And you know what? I got a plan, and it may not be the perfect thing, and you can do your polling saying it's good or bad or whatever, but I want to tell the American people from my heart what I believe." And if some candidate would do that, they would swing an election. But we don't have anybody that gets up in front of the mic and saying things from their heart anymore about what they want to do. It's like, oh my God, it's nauseating.
Ray, you were talking about property taxes. You made mention of it a number of times. I have a feeling that you have the city of Chicago property tax increase on your mind. Is that true?
Yeah, well, yes. Well, just an FYI, this week in Orland Park, a suburb of Chicago, we had a meeting last night about TIFs, and I brought a guy, Tom Tresser, out with one of the people running for trustee in Orland Park, Mohammed Jabber, and they were talking about how these TIFs redirect property taxes away from services to like schools, which are almost 70% of property taxes go to the schools in Orland Park and the fire district, the library, and other services. And they take that money and put it in a development TIF to help the big, rich developers do what they want to do. And in Tom Tresser, who was the TIF authority that we brought in, mentioned that when he was looking at Chicago in 2023, Chicago has $3 billion in money sitting in TIF money, tax increment financing money, sitting in an account that can be managed to oversee these TIFs that's not being used. $3 billion. And I was thinking, when I heard that yesterday, I thought, wow, why doesn't the mayor, Brandon Johnson, say or pass legislation to go to the city council and say, I want 300 million out of that TIF. You got $3 billion sitting in a bank account to cover these TIFs. Next year, the interest on it will probably be $300 million. I want that money. Give me 300 million instead of raising the property taxes of residents. People aren't thinking smart. You know, I think Brandon Johnson is backed into a corner because Chicago is a financial mess. I'm not sure how experienced he is about running a huge city like Chicago. But I think a lot of Chicago's problems are the result of prior mayors that have done a terrible job going. And I don't like Rahm Emanuel or Lori Lightfoot. Rich Daley, I disagreed with him politically, but Rich knew how to calm things down and get things done. But after him, they drove Chicago into a financial hole. And no matter who the mayor is today, they were going to have a mess. So, but I think instead of raising property taxes, why not take the 300 million out of that $3 billion that's sitting in a bank account for TIFs that's not being used? It just makes sense, doesn't it?
But how can he do that? Does he simply have to get it passed through the city council, or does he have to go to the state legislature and get it done?
No, it can be done in the city council because all these TIFs are approved by the city council and by the city. And when a TIF touches another TIF, TIF money from one TIF can be used in another TIF. And all these TIFs, and there's so many TIFs in Chicago, I think it's like 140 or something. They're all connected like a web. It's unbelievable. So any smart politician with a good lawyer can introduce legislation and put a tax on those TIFs if they want to do it that way, or penalize a TIF if they don't spend the money the way they're supposed to spend it, and put it for the public good. Because that's what a TIF is supposed to do. That's property tax money taken from the public and given to developers, and it's just sitting in a fund. And of course, the attorneys and the bankers are the ones making the money off of that money. So to me, it sounded like a natural thing to explore, but we're lacking the creativity, you know, in the city today. It's still about a back and forth fighting, not as bad as between Harris and Trump, but between Brandon and the city council, there is a big tussle going on.
I was going to say, you think that he could get the votes from the city council to do that?
Well, if he were smart and he took it to the people and he said, this is the way to do it without raising property taxes, we need the aldermen to support this idea. What's an alderman going to say? No, we're going to let the city go to pot. I think a lot of aldermen might say, wow, how come we didn't think of that?
Well, I spent 8 years in the Chicago City Council. TIFs really came after me. But based upon what I know, and you are correct, all these TIFs, there's so many of them, they're all interconnected. I don't want to give up the TIF money I have for my ward to do something in my ward, to improve my ward, to give it to the city at large so he doesn't have to raise property taxes. He ran for mayor of Chicago. He should have had some plans, some ideas on how he was going to put his budget together. It's not only the city budget, it's the budget for the Board of Education. I
Right.
mean, they are in very, very bad shape also. And you've got him feuding, with the superintendent of the schools. I tell you, Raymond, I believe that the superintendent of the schools will be the Hispanic candidate for mayor of Chicago the next time there is a mayoral election.
It could be. And just to point out about a TIF, the reason TIFs are bad, and a lot of people don't understand a TIF. A TIF, let's say on your block, they create a TIF where you live, and your property taxes are a certain amount of money. For the next 23 years, as property taxes increase, all that money above what was set the first year goes into a special fund controlled by the TIF. It doesn't go to pay for the schools or the library. The way property taxes are divided up in a city or the police or the firemen. It goes to the developers who want someone else's money to make their own profits. So to me, a TIF is just another way to help the developer do what they want to do without putting up their own money. And I think it's bad for a city like Chicago. It's bad for a place like Orland Park. And just to give a plug, there's a Facebook page we created called TIFs Taxes Orland Park. If you want to see the video with Tom Tresser talking about how terrible these TIFs have been to Chicago and how even terrible they are being to Orland Park, you should go check that out to get some more information. But my idea is, instead of fighting about it and calling each other names, because that's what's happening in Chicago, they could come up with a solution to find a source for property taxes to meet the town's financial challenges that they have.
Well, I certainly hope they do find a solution to the problem, because as you have said many, many times, Chicago is the engine that drives the entire region economically. And if Chicago is in trouble, the entire region is going to be in trouble. So
Yes.
those of us who live in the suburban area are going to be adversely impacted by anything that's adversely impacting the city of Chicago.
But as we've been talking about for the last 20 minutes, they'd have to change their mind from calling each other names to talking about issues and solutions. And unfortunately, that's not the tone of politics in America today.
No, it is.
It's name calling or nothing, and it's really sad.
Yep, I feel very, very bad about the whole situation. Uh, I I look forward to the election results next week, Tuesday, only
Yep.
so over.
All right. Well, let's encourage everybody, if you haven't voted, go out and vote. And the
Absolutely.
election is Tuesday, November 5th. And regardless of who you vote for, you should vote. And I'm Ray Hanania.
I'm Bill Lipinski, and this is Two Guys on Politics, and we'll see you next week. Raymond, it's
Right
all
after, right after the election, we'll be there to talk about what happened. All right. Thanks. Bye bye, everybody.